The night had a strange stillness to it, the kind that made even sound feel frozen in the air. At the small, nearly abandoned train station on the edge of a quiet American town, the last train had already come and gone. The platform lights flickered softly, casting long shadows across empty benches and cold steel tracks that stretched into darkness. A sharp winter wind moved through the station, cutting through coats, slipping under doors, and making the silence feel heavier. That was when he arrived. A black luxury truck pulled up near the curb, its headlights briefly breaking the darkness before the engine shut off. Out stepped a man who looked like he belonged anywhere except a place like this. He was a millionaire, cowboy well known in business circles and ranching communities alike. A man who owned thousands of acres, cattle ranches stretching beyond the horizon, and a reputation for making decisions without hesitation. His boots were polished, his coat expensive but practical, and his presence alone carried quiet authority. He had just returned from a long business negotiation in the city and was waiting for a private transport connection that would arrive later that night. Until then, he had stepped into the station to escape the wind, but something stopped him before he even reached the entrance. A figure on the far bench. At first, it was easy to miss, just a bundle of dark clothing, slightly hunched, still as stone. But as he got closer, he realized it was a woman. She was young. A nurse, judging by the faint hospital badge clipped to her coat. Her uniform was partially covered by a thin jacket that did little to protect her from the cold. Her hands were tucked tightly under her arms, and her shoulders trembled slightly with each gust of wind. She wasn't sleeping. She was just trying to endure. The cowboy slowed his steps. Something about her didn't match the place she didn't look lost in the usual sense. She looked like someone who had simply run out of options. He stood a few feet away for a moment, uncertain whether to speak. He wasn't used to situations like this. In his world, problems were negotiated, not encountered on empty train platforms at midnight. But then she lifted her head slightly, noticing him. Her eyes met his for a second, tired, alert, and cautious. "Fine," she said quickly, as if she had been asked a question he hadn't even spoken. Her voice was soft but firm, like someone used to pushing through exhaustion. The cowboy didn't respond immediately. Instead, he noticed the small details, the faint shaking of her hands, the way she kept glancing toward the empty tracks, the way her lips were slightly pale from the cold. "You don't look fine," he finally said, not unkindly. A pause. The wind howled again, louder this time, and she pulled her coat tighter around herself. "I missed the last train," she admitted reluctantly. "My shift ran longer than expected. I thought I could wait for the morning one. I didn't realize it would get this cold." Her words were simple, but they carried something heavier underneath. Exhaustion, responsibility, maybe even pride. The cowboy glanced around the station. No staff, no open shops, no other passengers. Just empty benches and silence. "You have somewhere to stay?" he asked. She hesitated. That hesitation said everything. "No," she finally answered. "I'll manage." There was a difference between saying something and believing it. And he could hear she was saying it, not believing it. The cowboy exhaled slowly, looking toward the vending machine inside the station, then back at her. He had handled negotiations worth millions without blinking, but something about this moment felt different, simpler, and somehow harder to ignore. He walked toward the machine, bought a hot coffee, and returned. She looked surprised when he handed it to her. "I didn't ask for—" "I know," he interrupted gently. "Just take it." Her fingers brushed his as she accepted it. Cold meeting warmth. She held the cup like it was something more valuable than it should be. For the first time, her shoulders loosened slightly. "Thank you," she said quietly. Cowboy nodded once, sitting down on the bench, not too close, Not too far. Just enough to share the space. Outside, the wind continued to move through the empty station, but inside that small moment, something had shifted. Not dramatically. Not obviously, but enough to change the direction of a night that had started with silence into something neither of them expected, and neither of them knew it yet. But this was the beginning of a story that would one day be remembered far beyond this freezing platform. The silence between them wasn't awkward, but it wasn't comfortable either. It was the kind of silence that forms when two strangers share the same space, but not the same world. The nurse held the hot coffee carefully in both hands, as if afraid it might disappear if she loosened her grip. The warmth slowly returned color to her fingers, but she still looked tired, deeply tired in a way sleep alone couldn't fix. The cowboy sat beside her on the bench, keeping a respectful distance. He wasn't someone who usually stayed in places like this longer than necessary. In his life, everything had purpose, schedules, outcomes. Yet tonight, he hadn't moved on. He glanced at her again. "You work at the hospital?" he asked, breaking the quiet. She nodded slightly. "Emergency unit." That explained a lot. The exhaustion in her face, the faint tension still lingering in her shoulders, the way she sat like someone who had been standing on their feet for too long without rest. "How long were you on shift?" he asked. She hesitated, then gave a small, tired smile. "Too long." A faint chuckle escaped her, but it didn't carry much humor. It sounded more like someone trying to make peace with their own limits. The cowboy leaned back slightly, folding his arms. "They don't treat you fairly there?" She looked down at her coffee for a moment, watching the steam rise. "It's not about fairness. It's about people needing help. You don't leave just because you're tired." That answer stayed in the air longer than expected. He studied her quietly. There was something steady in her voice, even in exhaustion. Not weakness. Responsibility. Outside, another gust of wind shook the station windows, making a soft rattling sound. The fluorescent lights above flickered briefly, then steadied again. The cowboy removed his coat without warning. She looked up immediately. "What are you doing?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he gently placed the coat over her shoulders. "It's cold," he said simply. She froze for a second, not from the temperature, but from the gesture. "I can't take this," she said quickly, already trying to remove it. "It looks expensive. I'll keep it on," he said, firmer now, but not harsh. "You're shaking." Her hands paused mid-motion. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to argue again. Pride fought with necessity in her expression. But the cold wind answered for her, slipping through the thin fabric of her uniform and making her shiver again. Slowly, reluctantly, she kept the coat on. It was heavy, warm, and smelled faintly of leather and something clean like open air after. Rain. The cowboy watched her settle into it. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "I know," he replied. Another silence followed, but it was different this time. Less distant. More human. She took a small sip of coffee, then glanced at him again. "You're not from around here, are you?" He gave a slight shake of his head. "Just passing through." "Business?" "Something like that." She nodded, accepting the vague answer without pressing further. People like him didn't usually explain themselves in detail. Even without knowing who he was, she could sense he carried a life far bigger than this station. Yet he was here, sitting beside her, sharing warmth without asking anything. In return, that thought unsettled her more than the cold ever had. "I'll pay you back for the coffee," she said after a moment. The cowboy let out a quiet breath that was almost a laugh. "It's a cup of coffee." "It still matters," she insisted. He turned slightly toward her now, his expression calm but thoughtful. "You think everything has to be balanced like that?" She looked at him, unsure. "Doesn't it?" A pause. "Outside, The wind pressed against the station again, but inside, the moment felt still. In my experience, he said slowly, the most important things aren't always equal. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked down at her hands resting under his coat, then at the empty platform beyond the glass. I missed my last train, she said quietly, almost like she was reminding herself. I'll probably have to wait until morning. The cowboy checked his watch briefly. Late night. No public transport for hours. No hotels nearby within walking distance. You shouldn't stay here all night, he said. I've done worse, she replied automatically, but even as she said it, she looked less certain than before. He noticed that too. For a few seconds, neither spoke. The station hummed faintly with electricity and wind. Then he made a decision. Come with me, he said. She looked at him immediately, alert again. What? I'll take you somewhere warm. You shouldn't spend the night here. Her eyes narrowed slightly, cautious now. I don't even know you. Fair point. He nodded once. That's true. Another pause. Then, more gently. But you also don't need to freeze in a train station because of it. The words weren't persuasive. They were simple. Honest. She studied him for a long moment, searching for something uncertain in his expression. But there wasn't anything there except calm certainty and something she couldn't quite name. Outside, the wind continued its long, lonely song. And inside that quiet station, the nurse was standing at the edge of a decision she didn't expect to make tonight. The walk from the station to the truck felt longer than it should have. Not because the distance was far, but because Clara was still adjusting to the idea that she had actually said yes. Each step carried a quiet uncertainty, like she might still change her mind at any moment and turn back toward the safety of familiar loneliness. But she didn't. Daniel walked slightly ahead of her, not rushing her, not guiding too closely. Just leading the way through the cold parking lot where a few street lights flickered weakly against the dark. The night air was sharper outside than it had felt through the station walls. Clara pulled the borrowed coat tighter around her shoulders. It still carried his warmth, and that alone made the cold more bearable. Daniel opened the passenger door of his truck for her. Careful, he said simply. She paused before getting in, glancing at the vehicle. It wasn't flashy in a loud way, but it was expensive, clean lines, strong build, quiet confidence. In every detail, the kind of vehicle that didn't need attention to be noticed. She hesitated. Daniel noticed. What is it? It just feels too much, she admitted. I'm not used to this kind of thing. He didn't question her. He simply replied, It's just a ride. That was the second time he had reduced something complicated into something simple. Clara finally stepped inside. The interior was warm, too warm at first. She exhaled softly as the heat hit her face, slowly thawing the last of the cold that had settled into her bones. The seat was comfortable in a way she wasn't used to, soft but structured, like everything had been designed with intention. Daniel got in beside her, started the engine, and within moments the station was behind them. The truck moved smoothly onto the empty road, headlights cutting through the darkness ahead. The town lights slowly faded into scattered points behind them, and the world outside became quieter with every mile. For a while, neither of them spoke. Clara rested her head against the seat, staring out the window. The passing landscape looked unfamiliar in the dark fields. Distant silhouettes of trees, long stretches of road with no signs of life. It felt strange to be moving instead of waiting. You can adjust the seat heater if you're still cold, Daniel said after a while. I'm okay, she replied automatically. But a moment later, she adjusted it anyway. Daniel noticed but didn't comment. Instead, he kept his focus on the road. Clara glanced at him from the corner of her eye. In the dim light of the dashboard, He looked different than he had at the station, less distant, more human. Not a name or a presence anymore, just a person driving through the night. "So," she said quietly, breaking the silence, "do you always pick up strangers at train stations?" A faint smile crossed his face, subtle but real. "Only the ones freezing." That made her exhale a small laugh before she could stop. It surprised her more than it should have. The truck continued forward, tires humming softly against the road. The world outside remained dark, but inside the vehicle, the silence was no longer heavy. It was shared. Clara shifted slightly in her seat. "I still don't understand why you're doing this." Daniel kept his eyes on the road. "We already talked about that." "I know," she said. "But people usually don't do things like this." "That depends on the people you meet," he replied. That answer lingered. Clara turned her gaze back to the window. The reflection of her face appeared faintly in the glass-tired eyes, messy hair, a borrowed coat that didn't belong to her. She looked like someone between moments in life. Not quite where she had been, not yet where she was going. "Where are we going exactly?" she asked after a while. "My place," Daniel said. "It's closer than anything else safe tonight." She didn't immediately respond to that. The idea of going to a stranger's home should have felt alarming. Under different circumstances, it would have. But tonight wasn't normal. Tonight had started at a freezing train station with no options left. And somehow, this felt like the only direction forward. "Don't worry," he added after a moment, as if reading her thoughts without looking at her. "You'll have your own space. I'm not trying to complicate your life." That was important to him. She could hear it in his tone. Clara nodded. Slightly, even though he wasn't looking. "Okay." The road stretched ahead in quiet lines, the truck moving steadily through the night. Somewhere in the distance, a faint glow of lights marked another town, but they didn't turn toward it. Instead, they kept going forward into quieter space where the world felt slower and less crowded. After a long silence, Clara spoke again. "You didn't have to do all this." Daniel glanced at her briefly. "I know, and yet you did." "Yes." She studied him for a moment. "Why?" He didn't answer immediately this time. The truck continued forward, tires steady, engine soft. "Finally," he said, "because sometimes you meet someone who doesn't deserve to be left in a place like that." Clara looked down at her hands. No one had said anything like that to her before. Not in that way, not so simply. Outside, the night kept moving past them, but inside the truck, something quieter was forming. Not yet trust, not yet understanding, but something in between. A beginning that neither of them had planned. And as the road stretched ahead, Clara realized something unsettling. She no longer felt like she was being taken somewhere. She felt like she was being given a chance to arrive. Morning didn't arrive loudly. It arrived gently, as if the world had decided to soften after a long night. Clara woke up slowly on the couch, disoriented for a moment by the unfamiliar warmth around her. The blanket over her shoulders was thick and clean, and for a brief second, she forgot where she was. Then memory returned in pieces. The freezing train station, the coffee, the coat, the long drive through the dark, and Daniel's quiet house. She sat up slightly. The room was brighter now. Morning light filtered through the windows, turning everything softer, less shadow, more shape. The house didn't feel strange anymore. It felt still, too still, almost. Clara adjusted the blanket and looked around. There was a note on the table. Went out for a bit. Food in the kitchen. Short, simple. She exhaled slowly, then stood up. Her body felt heavier than usual, like she had finally noticed how tired she really was. The kind of tired that doesn't disappear after one night of sleep. She walked toward the kitchen. True to the note, there was food prepared, nothing fancy, just enough. fruit, toast, coffee. But the gesture carried something more meaningful than the food itself. Someone had thought about her morning. Clara sat down and ate slowly, letting the quiet fill the space around her. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't rushing. After she finished, she found herself moving through the house more comfortably than before. The earlier tension had softened. It no longer felt like she was in a stranger's space. It felt like she was temporarily in someone else's calm world. Outside, she could see Daniel's land more clearly in daylight open fields stretching far, a fence line in the distance, trees standing still in the morning air. It was the kind of view that didn't demand anything from you. It simply existed. She stepped onto the porch. The air was cold but not harsh. It carried the freshness of early morning rather than the bite of night. Clara leaned slightly against the railing. A few minutes later, the sound of an engine approached. Daniel's truck came into view, slowing as it neared the house. He stepped out, wearing a simple jacket now, less formal than the night before. He noticed her immediately. "You're up," he said. "I didn't mean to sleep that long." She replied, "You needed it," he said simply. That answer again, no judgment. Just certainty. Clara watched him walk up the steps. In daylight, he looked different, too. Less like an imposing figure from the night before, more grounded. Real in a way that was easier to read. "Thank you," she said after a moment, "for everything." He paused slightly, as if he didn't see it as something that required that level of gratitude. "You don't have to keep saying that," he replied. "I do," she said. "I really do." A brief silence followed. Then Daniel nodded once. "All right." Clara smiled faintly at that. They stood there for a moment, neither rushing to fill the space. "You planning to head back today?" he asked. She hesitated. Reality returned slowly. Her job, her responsibilities, the life she had paused for a night. "Yes," she said. "I have to." He nodded, but didn't immediately move. Instead, he leaned slightly on the railing beside her. "You always work like that?" he asked. "Like what?" "Until you're exhausted enough to end up at train stations at midnight?" Clara gave a small, tired laugh. "It's not planned that way. But it happens." She didn't deny it. Instead, she looked out at the fields. "I guess I just don't stop easily," she admitted. "There's always someone who needs help." Daniel considered that quietly. "That's a good thing," he said, "but not if it breaks you." Clara looked at him. People usually praised her work. Rarely did anyone question the cost of it. "I don't really know how to stop," she said honestly. "That's not something you figure out in one night," he replied. A light breeze moved across the porch. The world felt calm in a way Clara wasn't used to. After a moment, she spoke again. "You know," she said, "I expected you to be different." Daniel raised an eyebrow slightly. "Different how?" "I don't know," she admitted, more distant, less normal. That made him exhale a quiet breath that almost resembled a laugh. "And what am I instead?" Clara thought about it. "Quiet," she said, "but not cold." That surprised even her when she said it. Daniel didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked out toward his land. "People assume wealth makes distance," he said after a moment. "Sometimes it just makes silence easier." Clara absorbed that. There was something honest in the way he spoke, not trying to impress, not trying to be understood, just stating what was real to him. And somehow, that made him easier to understand than most people she dealt with every day. A few seconds passed. Then Clara said, "I don't think I would have talked to you at the station if I met you in any other situation." Daniel glanced at her. "Probably not." She nodded. "But I'm glad I did." That admission hung between them longer than expected. Not dramatic, not emotional. Just real. For the first time, neither of them treated the connection as something unusual anymore. It was simply their quiet, unforced, and still new. And as the morning light spread further across the land, both of them began to realize something without saying it out loud. This wasn't just a chance encounter anymore. It was becoming a story neither of them had planned, but both of them had already started to carry. The first time Clara returned to Daniel's land after that night, she didn't announce it like a decision. She just showed up. It was a weekend she finally managed to take off rare, almost impossible in her world. The hospital had tried to keep her longer, as usual, but something in her had quietly refused, not loudly, not rebelliously, just firmly, and she drove. When Daniel opened the door and saw her standing there was no dramatic reaction, no surprise that turned into questions. Just a pause, like his mind had already accepted the possibility before his eyes confirmed it. "You're here," he said simply. Clara nodded. "I am." That was all it took. No explanation needed. No justification required. Inside, everything felt the same as before: the quiet house, the open land beyond the windows, the steady calm that didn't demand anything from her. But this time, it didn't feel unfamiliar. It felt returned to. Over the next few hours, they didn't try to define anything. They talked about small things: work, life, the strange difference between exhaustion and peace. Sometimes they said nothing at all. And somehow that was enough. But outside that quiet space, life was not as simple. Daniel's world noticed changes first. At a business function weeks later, someone finally asked him directly. "You've been distant lately," an older associate said, lowering his voice. "Is this about that nurse?" The question wasn't hostile. It was curious, evaluative. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He looked at the glass in his hand instead. Then he said, "Her name is Clara." A brief silence followed. That correction alone changed the tone. The associate tried again carefully. "You understand what people will say. The expectations." Daniel finally looked up. "I understand them," he said calmly. "I just don't agree with all of them." And that was the end of that conversation, but not the end of the pressure. In Clara's world, it came differently. Colleagues noticed her quieter phone calls, her slightly softer expressions after shifts, the way she no longer seemed completely consumed by exhaustion alone. And eventually, one of them asked, "Are you seeing someone?" Clara hesitated. She wasn't used to saying it out loud. Double quotes, "Yes," she said finally. That simple answer changed nothing on the surface, but everything underneath it. Because now it was real. Not just a memory of a freezing night. Not just a kindness from a stranger, but something that existed beyond that moment. Still, neither of them rushed it. There were no dramatic declarations, no grand announcements, just consistent presence messages, visits when possible, shared silence when words weren't needed. Daniel once said to her, as they stood outside his porch watching the sunset stretch across the land, "People think love has to make sense immediately." Clara glanced at him. "Does it?" He shook his head slightly. "Not always." That became something unspoken between them after that. Months passed, and slowly, without ceremony, their lives began to adjust around each other, not merging, not replacing, but aligning in small, careful ways. Clara learned what it felt like to sit in quiet without needing to fill it. Daniel learned what it felt like to share space without controlling its rhythm. Neither of them called it anything official at first, but people around them noticed anyway. One evening, at a small community gathering near Daniel's property, someone finally referred to Clara as his partner. No correction followed. Not from Daniel. Not from Clara. Just a brief glance between them and a shared understanding that labels often arrived after truth had already settled in. Later that night, As they walked back toward the house, Clara broke the silence. "Do you think this is strange?" she asked softly. Daniel thought for a moment. "No," he said. "Just unlikely." She smiled faintly. "That sounds more honest." They stopped near the porch. The night was calm, the air cool but gentle. Clara looked at him. "I never thought. A night like that at a train station would change everything." Daniel nodded slightly. "Neither did I." A pause. Then she added, "I used to think people from your world and mine didn't really meet like this." "They don't usually," he admitted. "But we did," she said. "Yes," he replied. "We did." And that was enough. No dramatic ending. No sudden transformation. Just two lives that had collided in the simplest way possible, through kindness in a moment where it would have been easier to ignore it. And from that moment, everything else had followed. Not like a fairy tale, not like a story forced into perfection, but like something real enough to be remembered. Because years later, when people spoke about them, they didn't describe wealth or profession first. They described a freezing night at a train station, a warm coat offered without hesitation, and a love that didn't begin with certainty, but with kindness that refused to look away.